Why hello there friends, it's Emma here, the Bookish Princess. Welcome to my February reading vlog, or rather my Febregency reading vlog. I'm so excited for the Regency era readathon that I'm hosting this month, and I did kind of clear my reading schedule for the month to focus just on Regency era works, most of these actually. I only have one that's written modern day, and that's nonfiction about the Regency era, but the rest of them are all Regency era authors, contemporaries of Jane Austen, and I'm just so excited to dive into them. I actually have to admit, I did start a little bit early on 2 of the items on my TBR, so you may have already seen the other hosts and I, Jennifer Brooks, Christy Lewis, and Stephanie from Miss Richards Reads. We all got together for a little Zoom call and we did a Regency poetry night, poetry salon. It was so much fun. We read out our favorites and some poems that you guys sent in as well. So I feel like I got kind of a head start on the Regency era poetry challenge, which is one of the challenges for Febregency. I got a head start on that because we filmed that at the very end of January, and it was so fun to just get a taste of all the greats, Keats and Byron and Shelley and Wordsworth and Coleridge. I am planning on reading more of some of those poets. And Cowper as well, William Cowper. He was Jane Austen's favorite, and I'm so excited to read more of him. But it was just a great way to start the readathon off and get, you know, a lovely taste of all sorts of beautiful, beautiful poetry. And then I did also decide to get started a little bit early on an audiobook of one of the kind of longer tomes on my list, which is Camilla by Fanny Burney. This is mentioned by Jane Austen in Northanger Abbey. Camilla, Cecilia, and Belinda are the 3 novels she quotes. They all have beautiful names, and once you start reading, or in my case, listening to Camilla, there are even more beautiful names because Camilla has 2 sisters and a cousin, and their names are, no, not I was about to say Evelina, but that's another book of Fanny Burney's. It's Camilla, Indiana, Eugenia, oh, what's the 4th one? It's also a beautiful name. I think Georgiana is their mother's name, and the gentlemen's names are Lionel and Sir Edgar Mandelbert, I think. And it's just, oh my gosh, you don't get better than those names. I'm just listening to the free LibriVox recording on YouTube, and it's actually often like a different narrator for each chapter. But I've kind of been enjoying it. It's fun to see how the different narrators, you know, do the voices or how they pronounce the names. The kind of subtitle of Camilla is A Picture of Youth. And that gives you a pretty good indication of the theme of the novel. It does start when Camilla and her sisters, and Lionel's her brother, Edgar Mandelbert, is kind of a orphan who, his father was a friend of Mr. Tyrrell, who is Camilla's father. So he has kind of been taught by Mr. Tyrrell, and so Mr. Tyrrell is kind of like his foster father. The brother of Mr. Tyrrell, so this is Camilla's uncle, his name is Sir Hugh, and he is quite wealthy. He moves nearby, and he doesn't have a lot to do. He never had a very bookish turn of mind. He regrets that profusely and kind of envies his brother, Mr. Tyrrell, who is very bookish and has, you know, this beautiful family and these children. Sir Hugh never got married and doesn't have any children, so he likes to have the kids around him. Camilla in particular, he thinks is such a winning little girl. She obviously just has a little spark that is wonderful. Although Indiana is the beauty of the bunch, even as a child. I really liked the beginning of chapter 1 of Camilla. Repose is not more welcome to the worn and to the aged, to the sick and to the unhappy, than danger, difficulty, and toil to the young and adventurous. Danger they encounter but as the forerunner of success, difficulty as the spur of ingenuity, and toil as the herald of honor. The experience which teaches the lesson of truth and the blessings of tranquility comes not in the shape of warning nor of wisdom. From such they turn aside, defying or disbelieving. 'Tis in the bitterness of personal proof alone, in suffering and in feeling, in erring and in repenting, that experience comes home with conviction, or impresses to any use. In the bosom of a respectable family resided Camilla. Nature, with a bounty the most profuse, had been lavish to her of attractions. Fortune, with a moderation yet kinder, had placed her between luxury and indigence. That kind of reminds me of the start of Emma, except it's like Jane Austen has kind of more streamlined it. Fanny Burney feels to me much more verbose than Jane Austen. I also have been trying to reread Udolpho this month by Anne Radcliffe, and with that there's a ton of description of nature and like the scenery. In Fanny Burney and Camilla, there's been a lot of description of the people and kind of what motivates them. And I feel like in Jane Austen, she doesn't like describe people's character, she just lets you see how they act and see how they speak, and you can see what their character is based on that. However, I still have been enjoying Camilla so much. So this could be considered a spoiler, so skip ahead if you don't want any spoilers for Camilla. What I'm about to tell you about does happen quite early in the novel, but it does have a big effect on the way everything turns out. Sir Hugh's favorite initially is Camilla. She obviously has the most engaging personality. She's just a really adorable, funny little girl. He loves to have her around, and he decides to make her his heiress. So he throws this big party for Camilla, and he invites all the other little kids. Now, Mrs. Tyrrell later says that Sir Hugh is more childish than her children, which is the best way to describe it. Sir Hugh is such a fun personality. He reminds me of, think of, from Sense and Sensibility, Sir John Middleton. That is kind of Sir Hugh's vibe a little bit, although Sir Hugh, I would say, is even more absurd of a personality than Sir John. Jane Austen described her own writing as a little bit of ivory that she works with so fine a brush, so like just tiny details. And Camilla, it does feel like the characters are drawn in a bit bolder strokes, a bit kind of bigger, more flamboyant personalities. So Sir Hugh invites everybody over for a birthday party, but he does not do a good job looking after everybody. And unfortunately, Eugenia, who is Camilla's little sister, ends up catching smallpox and getting in an accident. She falls off of a seesaw and gets some kind of a limp or some kind of a deformity, and it's Sir Hugh's fault in both situations, and he feels just absolutely terrible. So the one thing that he's able to give Eugenia is his wealth. So he decides Eugenia is going to get everything. Before, his will was more fair because Indiana, Camilla's cousin, is also, I think, Sir Hugh's niece. There must have been a third sibling who passed away because Indiana also has a brother whose name I can't remember right now. Sir Hugh was going to provide for both of them because he's basically been raising them and paying for them and paying for their schooling as they grow up. But he feels so bad about Eugenia because kind of her youthful beauty is all gone. So Sir Hugh just gives her everything and doesn't provide anything for anyone else. But he thinks that the way he can fix this is by arranging marriages as he likes. Hold on, I have to remind myself of the name. Lavinia, that's Camilla's older sister, so the first kind of batch of chapters takes place when they are quite young, but then we kind of skip forward in time to when they are teenagers and starting to go out in society. And I'm surprised, Lavinia, that's Camilla's older sister's name. We just don't see much of her. She just doesn't really enter into the picture. Clermont Linmere, that is the name of Indiana's brother, and so who Sir Hugh really should have been providing for. And Sir Hugh has really been encouraging Clermont in his studies, partly because he feels so bad he didn't apply himself to his studies when he was young. So he decides that Clermont is going to marry Eugenia. So he'll still inherit, in a sense, through marriage, the wealth. And while Eugenia is growing up, Sir Hugh has her educated, which actually was not really his initial plan. It's funny the sort of twists and turns it takes. Initially, Sir Hugh wants to correct his own ignorance, and so he engages this tutor, but he hates the lessons, and he feels bad sort of firing the tutor and putting the tutor out of a job. So first he tells the tutor to teach Indiana, and Indiana wants absolutely none of it. She's only interested in her appearance. And then that's when he decides to educate Eugenia and is like, oh, hey, this will be perfect. Clermont is very bookish. I'll make sure Eugenia is very bookish, and then they'll be the perfect match. And Indiana, one of the narrators pronounced it Indiana, and it just sounded so great that now I always want to say it that way. Sir Hugh decides Indiana should marry the kind of ward of his brother, Mr. Tyrrell, Sir Edgar Mandlebert. See, I enjoy all of these kind of convoluted family lines, but if you don't, you might not enjoy Camilla quite as much. It's not that convoluted. Once you get all the characters down, then it's pretty easy to follow. Anyway, Sir Edgar Mandlebert. Is he a sir? Is he not a sir? Maybe he's not a sir. He might not actually have a title. I should just be calling him Edgar Mandlebert. Somehow the name Edgar Mandlebert seems like it should have a sir in front of it. Edgar Mandlebert is going to inherit a very large estate, and Sir Hugh thinks it'd be perfect for Indiana to marry him. So he's like, then she'll be taken care of. Once the action skips forward and they're all grown up and starting to come out, we see how the affections actually end up. I'm maybe 5 hours into the 40-hour audiobook, which, isn't a bad dent, but I still have a long way to go. But Claremont Lindmere has not yet shown up. I'm really interested to see what's going to happen when he shows up. But yes, I've definitely been enjoying it, and I'm glad that I'm listening to one of my long books as an audiobook because, like I said, I want to finish Udolpho, and I still have a pretty good chunk of that to get through. And audiobooks are just so nice, a nice way to kind of reclaim time that you would have lost otherwise in the car or doing dishes. So that's been going great. And then I have also started on Dorothy Wordsworth. This is, we're reading this book together. We're reading this book and discussing it in my Discord group this month. There's actually a free Gutenberg edition that has even more of her journals than this pretty little English Journeys edition. This is just Life at Grasmere. So this is, I think, 1802 and 1800 and 1801, I'm pretty sure. The other Gutenberg edition that I was looking at starts in 1798 at Alfoden. How does one pronounce that? Alfoxden, which I believe is in Somerset. And Dorothy and her brother William Wordsworth, the famous poet, they lived kind of within walking distance of the sea. And that sounds so beautiful. I love the way she's constantly describing her walks, going out to see the sea and what the clouds over it look like. That journal actually started in early January, and it's beautiful to see the progression of the spring. I feel like around now, actually, in 1798, in February, there's a bit of a thaw, and she starts seeing, buds on the trees. She starts seeing some green, but then it gets cold again. And then finally, the spring really starts to arrive. But yes, Dorothy Wordsworth is full of beautiful, beautiful descriptions of nature. She and William got married, and she continued to live with William and his family in the Lake District, which was up in Cumbria. And that's when they moved to Grasmere. So it's been lovely to read that too, especially to read about her walks by Rydal Water. I've loved Wordsworth for a long time, and on 2 past trips to England, I went to Wordsworth destinations. Back in 2013, when I started this YouTube channel, the trip that launched this YouTube channel, because I started doing YouTube to post some travel vlogs from that trip, I went to Tintern Abbey, inspired by the poem Tintern Abbey. And then in 2016, I visited the Lake District with my cousin, and we went to Dove Cottage, and we walked there along Rydal Water, and I feel like I know the walkway that she's talking about. So it's fun to picture that as I read it. Just a really beautiful portrait of countryside life. Fun to hear about the books that are arriving, the books she's reading, how she helps William with his poetry. It sounds like they had a really beautiful, supportive relationship. She talks about reading Timon of Athens and Midsummer Night's Dream, so she obviously got in lots of Shakespeare. It has been an excellent start to Febregency so far, and I'm excited to dive more into my TBR. I just finished doing my makeup and filming my little week 1 Febregency reel, which I thought would be a fun way to kind of keep you guys updated on my progress throughout the month so you don't have to wait till the end of the month for this big, long monthly wrap-up. But if you haven't checked those out, I'll make sure I link them up above. I did upload them as YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels. It's always so hard to guess what the algorithm is going to show people. And Shorts and Reels, it feels like, are in a totally different category from normal posts. I did also upload a reel last month that was where to start with Jane Austen, which I feel like is a question I've gotten asked a lot. So if you didn't see that pop up in your feed, I'll make sure I link that as well. You should definitely check it out. I was so pleased with how that turned out. It is fun to use some beautiful Jane Austen film music because there's such beautiful music in the film adaptations. I decided I should get out my, I have a songbook, sheet music for piano of the songs from the film adaptations, the soundtracks. So I'm gonna get that out this month and practice some of those. Maybe I'll use that as my background music. And before I tell you about my Febregency books, I thought I'd show you this book, which is a makeup book. Isn't it beautiful? My cousin found it. And got it for me for Christmas. It does seem very appropriate for the bookish princess. It's like a Beauty and the Beast. Revolution is the name of the company. Has lots of pretty colors. I love the names of them. Mrs. Potts, the gray stuff, obviously. The West Wing, library. Definitely one of my favorite colors. Becky said that there is also a Snow White palette, so I'm probably gonna have to go and look at that one too. So I already mentioned this in my Febregency week 1 reel short wrap up, but sadly one of my Febregency picks was a disappointment, and that was Lucy Worsley's Jane Austen at Home. I didn't notice this until I'd read 75 pages and felt really frustrated that Lucy Worsley's name is a lot bigger than Jane Austen's name. So I watched Lucy Worsley's documentary about Jane Austen, and I hugely enjoyed it. So often, Jane Austen documentaries can always be a little bit of a toss-up for me. Sometimes they're really too heavy on interpretation, and biographies are the same way. And I mean, some works are meant to be interpretation, and that's fine. But I prefer just to hear the facts of Jane Austen's life, what we know about her from her novels, from her letters, from other letters, you know, that can be dug up. I appreciate when the researcher just kind of gives you that information and lets you draw your own conclusion. And it felt like, on the whole, Lucy Worsley documentary kind of left it to you to decide what, you know, how to interpret the events they were presenting. And like, they showed lots of the locations where Jane Austen lived or visited, which was really cool. So I don't usually buy a book that I'm not confident I'm going to like, but because I liked the documentary so much, I thought, you know, I'm just going to buy the book. I'm sure I'll enjoy it. I'm sure it will have the same sort of focus on facts rather than on interpretation. But no. Definitely not the case. I saw someone on Instagram posting about how frustrating it can be when modern day commentators and researchers try to impose modern day values on people from the past. And it's like, oh, we can like Jane Austen because she had modern day values. And I'm not sure how accurate that is, or how unbiased you're being in just wanting your favorite authors to agree with you and think the same way you do. Although obviously that is partly what attracts you to your favorite authors. But I always think that, especially classics like Jane Austen, that's been read for 200 years, has been read throughout many different time periods where people had many different views and values. What makes an author a classic author is that they can speak to all those different time periods. And in a sense, they don't belong to our time period. Jane Austen is timeless. It is kind of hubristic the way we look back on past societies and are just so harsh in our judgments, because I'm pretty sure in another couple hundred years, the people of the future will look back on our generation and find plenty of things to harshly criticize. Obviously, in Jane Austen's time, the way so many doors were closed to women was really horrible. And, you know, women didn't have access to education. They weren't allowed opportunities the same way men were. It is very frustrating to read about and learn about. But one of the things that I've always loved about Jane Austen is that she never became embittered by any restraints imposed upon her. She essentially didn't let them impose restraints upon her. As Mr. Darcy says about Elizabeth Bennet's piano playing, no one admitted to the pleasure of hearing you could think anything wanting. I would say that no one admitted to the pleasure of reading Jane Austen can think anything wanting. Like, I don't think she would have been a better author if she lived in a different time period, or if her father had taught her Latin and Greek the way he taught her brothers Latin and Greek. I mean, in every time period, in every age, we have various restrictions imposed upon us. You're never going to get away from all those restrictions. And being able to make the most of what you have is a strength, and I think that's a strength Jane Austen had. I slogged through 75 pages. It was an exercise in frustration, and that was, at that point I decided it's not worth it. There are so many other things that I want to read in Febregency. You know, I want to read those other things. But even in those first 75 pages, there were multiple times when she acted like, oh, if only Jane Austen could have been a Bronte. If only Jane Austen could have been a Mary Wollstonecraft. And the Brontes and Mary Wollstonecrafts of the world are wonderful too. They're individuals. That's the great thing about individuals, is that we can all be different and have different strengths and different perspectives and still be really valuable. It's funny because sometimes these sort of feminist interpretations that undercut the women of the past, instead of focusing on their talents and what they did accomplish, they focus on ways in which they were held back. And you should acknowledge ways in which they were held back, but if that overshadows the talents, then you're actually demeaning a woman instead of celebrating a woman. You're no longer, that's no longer feminism. That in itself was disappointing enough. But you know, I might have soldiered through in spite of that, if not for the sort of malice. There's like an undercurrent of spite towards the Austen family, and that I just found so off-putting. I've seen that before. People are annoyed that Cassandra burned her letters. You know, they're annoyed with her brothers and her nephew for writing such a pompous autobiography. I read the James Austen Leigh, her nephew's biography last year, and the first half of it I was pretty frustrated, but then it was almost as if Jane came and sat down next to me and said, "He's my nephew. What are you gonna do? You love him anyway." And I just started to see little glimmers of spirit and like little glimmers of like just such a strong, beautiful family. And like his love for his aunt, like it is in there, you know. It's a frustrating book too, right? Mr. Collins wrote a biography of his aunt Jane Austen. That's what it is. And yes, it would be nice if we knew more about Jane Austen, but we don't. And I don't think we should throw her family under the bus, throw her mother under the bus. From what we know in the letters and the novels, it seems like she really did love her family and they loved her, and like it was, no family is perfect, but it seems like it was a really loving, tight-knit group. Obviously, Lucy Worsley does not share that interpretation, which is fine. You know, there isn't a lot of evidence. You don't have to have the same interpretation, but she was so heavy-handed on pushing her point of view of the family as kind of toxic and the mother as toxic. And she would start acting as if that was the facts of the case rather than her interpretation. Frequently, she would cite some like opinion or point of view from another like book or letter or person of that era and say, well, we don't know what, say, Mr. Austen thought, but here's what, you know, a publication, a newspaper, or like a book of the time said. So it's likely Mr. Austen thought that too. I'm like, okay, fair enough, that's a hypothesis. We don't really have the evidence to prove that hypothesis one way or the other. But then a couple pages later, she would act as if she had conclusively proved that Mr. Austen had said that himself, when it's like, there are lots of things in newspapers these days that I do not agree with, but I'm sure it was the same at their time. Going back to the thing about individuals, everyone has their own, everyone's point of view is slightly different, even if you live in the same time period. And I know I already went on a little rant in last month's reading blog about the way the sort of current culture and current media treats the topic of faith. There was a little moment where she was talking about a sampler that another young lady named Jane Austen had stitched. It sounds like it wasn't even our Jane Austen, it was a different person. Again, the way she would apply things from other sources and act like they exactly fitted on top of the Austen family. It was just so not what I would call good research. The sampler was like, I think, a line from the Bible, something about trusting in God. And Lucy Worsley says, even if Jane Austen didn't contradict it in public, she agreed to none of it in private. And I'm not sure how well you know Jane Austen if you think her faith wasn't important to her. Again, if you choose to interpret it that way, that's your interpretation. But there is just a wealth of evidence that Jane Austen's faith was very deeply important to her in her letters, like when no one else is watching. She's just writing to her sister. There are things that make it clear that her faith was not just something she put on Sundays. I think in her novels too, just because the faith of the characters isn't really blatant, like when you get to those really important moments, it's there. Marianne at the end of Sense and sensibility. Talks about how she wanted to make amends not only to her mother and Eleanor, her sister, but to her God. It feels like that was very authentic and very real, and something that was important to Austen and was not just put on for show. So yeah, that definitely turned me off as well. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to go on a long rant about that, but I was so surprised. I really thought I was gonna like it because I enjoyed the documentary, and I feel bad because I know a lot of you guys liked it. Obviously, you should make up your own mind and come to your own interpretation of things, but I guess that's what frustrated me most about the book, was that Lucy Worsley, I felt, did not leave me to make my own interpretation. She really wanted to hammer in her own. So I hope I'm still in focus and that this wintry evening light has not yet faded from us. Anyway, thought I would do a quick little library haul. The Library Love Readathon is, I think, this week. There's all sorts of fun prompts to get you to your library and get you just picking up some books off the shelf. I think it was Rainy here on BookTube, picked up Childe Harold's Pilgrimage for the travel book prompt, which is so brilliant. I had 3 Febregency books and 1 non-Febregency book. This really should have been a Flannery January read. Christy was talking about it. It's the letters of Flannery O'Connor. I read the prayer journal of Flannery O'Connor last month and absolutely loved it, but the letters sound so cool too. As you can see, it's quite hefty, and I'm not going to be starting it during Febregency. I think I can renew it, and I will have it through the middle of March. So hopefully this will be a belated March Flannery January read. Flannery March read. I picked up Austen's favorite, William Cowper. She certainly quotes him a ton in the books and in the letters. I read out one of Cowper's poems in our poetry night video, and I'm sure I will sit down and read you guys some more. Reading about him a little bit, I think he was famous for a more playful work that was, I mean, the Retired Cat that I read is quite playful, but he also wrote, I think it was called John Gilpin's Walk, or maybe it was just called John Gilpin. Anyway, it's kind of a goofy work, and I think it was his most popular, but it's funny because a lot of his other works are much more deep and melancholy and, you know, reflections on life and mortality. The Diverting History of John Gilpin, showing how he went farther than he intended and came safe home again. So he has this like playfulness in some of his poems, but then he really has a seriousness in others. He, I think, struggled a lot with mental health. I've been reading from The Task, which is kind of a long, it has multiple books, multiple kind of sections of very long poems, but 2 of them are The Winter Evening and The Winter Morning Walk, and they're really charming, and they just feel very appropriate for this time of year. I've really been enjoying reading more poetry this month. I feel like I've been kind of slowing down in my reading. Some of these poems of Cowper's are quite long, and it's just a long description of a walk, which, you know, you could film in 20 seconds, and he takes, you know, maybe 20 pages to describe, but he has a lot of beautiful things to say, and I've really been enjoying kind of slowing down my pace to the pace of the poems in the longer books like Camilla and Udolpho. However, it is nice to have some shorter works that kind of jumpstart your TBR and make you feel like you're making progress. This is Sheridan's School for Scandal. I picked it up at the library. I think this is my library love pick because one of them was pick up a book based on the cover, and I was not planning on reading School for Scandal. I have another play picked out, which I'm still hoping to get to, but this cover was so beautiful, and I got through it all in one morning. So funny, so witty. The characters were great. They're all like sort of named based on their attributes. So we have Lady Sneerwell. She kind of is the headmistress at the School for Scandal. We have Lady Teazle. Sir Peter and Lady Teazle are the 2 main characters. Mrs. Candor, who is only candid in retelling all the scandalous tales she tells. And then she's like, oh, well, I wouldn't spread that gossip. But how are you going to stop people from talking? I'm only saying what I heard. Yeah, you hear even on the first page exactly what we're going to get. Lady Sneerwell is talking with Snake, and Snake has made sure that this tidbit of gossip has reached Mrs. Clackett's ear. Why, truly, Mrs. Clackett has a very pretty talent and a great deal of industry. True, madam, and has been tolerably successful in her day. To my knowledge, she has been the cause of 6 matches being broken off, and 3 sons disinherited, of 4 forced elopements, and as many close confinements, 9 separate maintenances, and 2 divorces. Nay, I have more than once traced her causing a tete-a-tete in the Town and Country magazine, when the parties, perhaps, had never seen each other's face before in the course of their lives. So yes, you cannot believe all you hear although Lady Sneerwell would like you to. This felt very Oscar Wilde. If you like Oscar Wilde, you should definitely pick up Richard Sheridan. There were so many funny, pithy quotes. Isn't it provoking to have the most ill-natured things said of one? And there's my friend Lady Sneerwell has circulated I don't know how many scandalous tales of me, and all without any foundation too. That's what vexes me. Ay, madam, to be sure, that is the provoking circumstance, without foundation. Yes, yes, there's the mortification indeed, for when a scandalous story is believed against one, there certainly is no comfort like the consciousness of having deserved it. Here's an interesting passage. If to raise malicious smiles at the infirmities or misfortunes of those who have never injured us be the province of wit or humor, heaven grant me a double portion of dullness. And another character says, yet they appear more ill-natured than they are. They have no malice at heart. Then is their conduct still more contemptible, for in my opinion nothing could excuse the intemperance of their tongues but a natural and uncontrollable bitterness of mind. Since it's a library copy, I couldn't underline my quotations the way I usually do with my copies. But anyway, this has been just a delightful Febregency read. I'm so glad that my trip to the library prompted me to pick up some Sheridan. I'd love to read more by him now. And then last but not least, I have no idea if I'm going to have time to get to Sir Walter Scott, but this copy also, I just enjoyed the patterning on the cover. It's Rob Roy, which is I think one of the Waverley novels. I'm not sure if they are actually connected by any kind of plot, or if they're just maybe told in like a similar neighborhood. They're epic tales of ancient Scotland. There's an awesome Scottish engraving on the front. Oh wow, this actually has lots of illustrations all throughout. I have no idea if I'll be able to get to this, but that's the nice thing about the library. You're not spending any money, so it doesn't hurt. I think I've definitely lost my light now, but there's my Febregency update for the moment. It would appear that my roses are reaching the end of their lifetime, but they have been really beautiful for the past week or so and just have brightened up my desk immensely. So as you can see here, I have been reading some more from Cowper. I've always wanted to read more of his works, and so I've been trying to really, dip into some of the longer poems from The Task. I really loved this part from The Winter Walk at Noon. There is in souls a sympathy with sounds, and as the mind is pitched, the ear is pleased with melting airs or martial, brisk, or grave. Some chord in unison with what we hear is touched within us, and the heart replies, how soft the music of those village bells, falling at intervals upon the ear, in cadence sweet, now dying all away, now pealing loud again, and louder still, clear and sonorous as the gale comes on. With easy force it opens all the cells where memory slept. Wherever I have heard a kindred melody, the scene recurs, and with it all its pleasures and its pains. Sorry, Cymbeline is chasing one of her toys down here. I don't know if you can hear her. Such comprehensive views the spirit takes, that in a few short moments I retrace, as in a map, the voyager his course, the windings of my way through many years. Short as in retrospect the journey seems, it seemed not always short, the rugged path and prospect oft so dreary and forlorn, moved many a sigh at its disheartening length. And then further along, the night was winter in his roughest mood, the morning sharp and clear, but now at noon upon the southern side of the slant hills, and where the woods fence off the northern blast, the season smiles, resigning all its rage, and has the warmth of May. The vault is blue without a cloud, and white without a speck, the dazzling splendor of the scene below. Again the harmony comes o'er the vale, and through the trees I view the embattled tower, whence all the music, so the church tower where the bells were ringing. Look, I'm trying to film here. I don't know if they can hear you or not, but I can hear you, and it's kind of loud. I again perceive the soothing influence of the wafted strains, and settle in soft musings as I tread the walk, still verdant, under oaks and elms, whose outspread branches overarch the glade. The roof, though movable through all its length as the wind sways it, has yet well sufficed, and intercepting their silent fall, the frequent flakes, has kept a path for me. No noise is here, or none that hinders thought. The redbreast warbles still, but is content with slender notes, and more than half suppressed. Pleased with his solitude, and flitting light from spray to spray, where'er he rests, he shakes from many a twig the pendant drops of ice that tinkle in the withered leaves below. Stillness, accompanied with sounds so soft, charms more than silence. Meditation here may think down hours to moments. Isn't that cool? May think down hours to moments. Oh, sorry, shoot. It was the book out of frame. Maybe I'll just put a still image here so that the book isn't wandering all over the place for you guys. Here the heart may give an useful lesson to the head, and learning wiser grow without his books. Knowledge and wisdom, far from being one, have ofttimes no connection. Knowledge dwells in heads replete with thoughts of other men, wisdom in minds attentive to their own. Knowledge, a rude, unprofitable mass, the mere materials with which wisdom builds, till smoothed and squared and fitted to its place, does but encumber whom it seems to enrich. Knowledge is proud that he has learned so much. Wisdom is humble that he knows no more. Books are not seldom talismans and spells by which the magic art of fruiter wits holds an unthinking multitude enthralled. Some to the fascination of a name surrender judgment, hoodwinked. Some the style infatuates, and through labyrinths and wilds of error leads them by a tune entranced, while sloth seduces more, too weak to bear the insupportable fatigue of thought, and swallowing therefore without pause or choice the total grist unsifted, husks and all. But trees and rivulets, whose rapid course defies the check of winter, haunts of deer, and sheep walks populous with bleating lambs, and lanes in which the primrose ere her time peeps through the moss that clothes the hawthorn root, deceive no student. Wisdom there and truth, not shy as in the world, and to be won by slow solicitation, seize at once the roving thought and fix it on themselves. Ah, that's just so lovely. There's just so much to think about in that passage. And I love how he is talking about, how books can mislead and people can use books to deceive. And of course today there are many more forms of media than just books, which can be used to deceive. And it's somewhat ironic that Cowper himself is writing a book, but I guess that's the funny dichotomy of books and media. It's like they can be used to deceive and they can also be used to fight deception. And then as now, you cannot surrender judgment, you can't be lazy. Where does it say? You can't be lazy, too weak to bear the insupportable fatigue of thought. What a great way to put it. Just the language and the writing is so, so beautiful. The view screen of the camera and the angle I'm trying to hold the book at are not exactly compatible, so that's why it maybe hasn't stayed in focus or in frame this whole time. I picked this up at my local library, although I would really love to buy my own copy of Cowper now. Add it to my shelf because it's so wonderful. I also have been enjoying the Only hymns, which he wrote with, I can't remember now if Only was the place where they were living or the name of the friend who he wrote the hymns with. But they're just absolutely lovely, and I recognize some of them. I'm not sure if I've just read them before or if I have sung them as a hymn at Mass. Cowper's faith was very important to him, but he was very concerned with predestination, and he was very worried that, he'd sinned too much and God would turn from him. And you can kind of see that struggle in the hymns. He's always seeking to fight for a hold on faith and a hold on hope. I like this one, The Waiting Soul. Breathe from the gentle south, O Lord, and cheer me from the north. Blow on the treasures of thy word and call the spices forth. I wish, thou knowest, to be resigned and wait with patient hope, but hope delayed fatigues the mind and drinks the spirit up. Help me to reach the distant goal, confirm my feeble knee. Pity the sickness of a soul that faints for love of thee. Cold as I feel this heart of mine, yet since I feel it so, it yields some hope of life divine within, however low. I seem forsaken and alone, I hear the lion roar, and every door is shut but one, and that is mercy's door. There, till the dear deliverer come, I'll wait with humble prayer, and when he calls his exile home, the Lord shall find me there. But this is one that I'm sure I've heard before. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footsteps in the sea and rides upon the storm. Deep in unfathomable mines of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs and works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take, the clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. The bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. Just the language and the thoughts embedded in the language are just so, so beautiful. Well, I just filmed one of my little Febregency reel weekly update short videos, and I thought I'd just turn the phone the other direction. I'd just be lazy and film on my phone to give you a real quick little update. Most of the things that I ended up reading this second week of Febregency were on my Kindle. I did finish Castle Rackrent by Maria Edgeworth. It was quite short. This was, I believe, the first novel she ever wrote, and it's all told from the perspective of this steward of an Irish estate, and you really get to see all of the vicissitudes and vagaries and absurdities of the family. The servant himself is obviously loyal to the family, and he's always talking about, oh, what's due to the family, and like, oh, but he was a great member of the family. But of course, the things he's saying are all kind of contradicting that, because really a lot of these people were just really terrible. There's like 4 generations of the family too, but every last one of them is broke. So it's like, how are they even managing to sustain this lifestyle? It's totally just on debt. The characters I felt most sympathy for in the story were like the merchants and the people that sold stuff to this family, because they never got paid. One of the heads of the family, like, I think used a razor one morning. He's like, oh, this isn't a good razor. At least I haven't paid for it yet. Like, It was good. I'm glad I've read it. It's been on my list to kind of check out. But I definitely did miss Mariah Edgeworth's usual beautiful voice. So this is Belinda, which I have read. It was so good. I remember being so impressed by the writing, and like she deliberately is taking a very like specific writing style in Castle Rackrent because she's telling it in the voice of the servant. And in fact, there's a huge glossary at the end, like explaining all the different sort of random little phrases that the servant uses. But I did miss Mariah Edgeworth's usual beautiful writing voice, and I know I've seen some Febregency posts with some quotations from Mariah Edgeworth that just made me want to pick up one of the books told more in her voice, like Helen. I've never read that one, or The Absentee. That is also about a sort of Irish gentry family, but I think it's told in a more serious way. It's told with Mariah Edgeworth's usual writing style. So yes, I'm thinking I will read another Mariah Edgeworth in March because I'm glad I got to read her first novel, but her usual voice is so beautiful, and you don't really get her usual voice in this one. I'm also pleased to report that I finished Udolpho. So I started this during the Boutique Readathon in October because I thought it'd be fun as like a spooky read, and I got like a third of the way through, which a third of the way through is like 230 pages in, you know, because it's a long one, and just not much was happening. There were these interesting little tidbits of mysteries, but it just was kind of dragging, and so I put it aside. It turns out like their real action starts like right after I put it down. So I really quickly got into this again and read it quite fast. It was, as Henry Tilney said in Northanger Abbey, I read it with my hair standing on end the whole time. I definitely was reading quickly, and it was probably good that, you know, I'd started slow because I knew that like I'd already read a bunch of her beautiful descriptive nature passages. So like if I got to a part that was really exciting and then all of a sudden, you know, Emily is like at this random farmhouse in the Tuscan countryside, and she's like having a sort of little respite, and it's beautifully described, but like I just want to see her get back to Udolpho and find out what's happening, so I would just kind of like skim pretty quickly. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. I would like to read another Anne Radcliffe, and it definitely is a great thing to have read if you've read Northanger Abbey. I always thought, oh, well, I enjoy Northanger Abbey. I don't really need to have read, I mean, obviously I wanted to at some point, but I didn't feel like, you know, sort of urgency to get to Anne Radcliffe. There were just so many Northanger Abbey moments. All these little things that Jane Austen had taken and put into Northanger Abbey that just made so much more sense. So if you've been sleeping on Anne Radcliffe or Mysteries of Udolpho, don't do that. I mean, know that the first third of the book is going to be slow going. But after that, I would say, you know, the story really drew me along, and I wanted to know what was happening. And it was like lots of action, lots of drama, lots of suspense. Catherine in Northanger Abbey is excited to go to the Abbey because of the incredible castles that she's read about in Mysteries of Udolpho. And so, you know, we have these incredible castles, these incredible situations, and yet the heroine, Emily, she lives at La Vallée. I wanted to call her Emily La Vallée. Her name is Emily St. Aubert. Emily St. Aubert, it almost can't believe the situations she's in sometimes. I mean, it's funny because she herself is, you know, sort of a typical Gothic heroine. She's beautiful. She has these young men who are fainting away for love of her. She is constantly fainting away. At like every critical moment, I'm like, don't faint, Emily. She can't take it. But she does still have this strength of character, and there are some times when she, you know, stands up for herself, and she has this kind of strength of principle. And even in these crazy situations, she doesn't like automatically believe, you know, what she's told. Like if she hears a ghost story, she'll like kind of smile at Annette, her servant, and be like, Annette, is that really, like there's some really sweet, funny conversations between them. And of course, there are times when Emily obviously like feels like, did I just see a spirit? Like that must have been what I saw. In Northanger Abbey, Catherine's imagination is influenced by these stories. But it's interesting that like even in the story, even in Udolpho, there is a certain level of groundedness and realism, and like Emily St. Aubert like trying to be sort of rational and fight against her imagination, which obviously in Northanger Abbey, it's like Catherine Morland just imagines all of it, whereas in Udolpho, it's like Emily wishes she was imagining all of it. Well, friends, I hope you've been having a lovely February and a lovely Febregency. I've had so much fun with the readathon this month. So many authors that I've just been meaning to get to forever and never buckled down and opened them up. So many contemporaries of Jane Austen, and it's been so much fun to see the Regency reads that you all have discovered on Instagram and YouTube. I feel like there have been so many interesting things. Apparently, Richard Sheridan, who I absolutely loved, School for Scandal, that was one of my favorites of the month. Apparently, he also wrote a play about the American Revolution. Like, Hamilton, but from the British perspective. It was a musical, I think, not just a play. That was Wicked Pluto's reading. She mentioned that in her Febregency TBR. There was also Ursula's Odds and Ends. She mentioned finding a book about Dorothy Wordsworth and Jane Austen. The two of them never met. I think it's just kind of a side-by-side biography, but that sounds kind of neat. The one last author that I wanted to get to before the end of the month, since I got to Cowper, one of Jane Austen's favorites, I wanted to get to Samuel Johnson. His name might sound familiar because he compiled a very popular dictionary that I think from like the sort of mid-1700s to the 1900s for over a century. It was the dictionary. He also compiled many of Shakespeare's works, although these projects took him a long time to get to. He was born in kind of the early 1700s and died at the end of the century, so he was really there throughout the whole 18th century, and then of course into the Regency period, the early 19th century, he was still very much talked about and read. I started out trying a journal of a tour to the Hebrides by Boswell. He's Johnson's biographer. I didn't really get on with it. He does quote Johnson a lot, but it just felt a little tedious. It wasn't grabbing me, and so I thought I would try The Idler instead. So Johnson wrote a ton, but apparently he always had to kind of battle procrastination. It's sort of ironic that he accomplished these huge works, but he titles his periodical The Idler. It was an essay that came out every week, twice a week. Apparently sometimes he would sort of dash off the essays right before they were due, but they're really interesting, beautifully written, a great kind of combination of humor and seriousness. In one of them, he talks about the paper and choosing a name for the paper. It will be easily believed to the idler that if his title had required any search, he never would have found it. And later, if similitude of manners be a motive to kindness, the idler may flatter himself with universal patronage. There is no single character under which such numbers are comprised. Every man is, or hopes to be, an idler. Even those who seem to differ most from us are hastening to increase our fraternity. As peace is the end of war, so to be idle is the ultimate purpose of the busy. There were so many quotations that I just enjoyed so much. Fanny Price, in one of the scenes in Mansfield Park, I guess she isn't technically reading it, but in her room there is a copy of The Idler and a copy of Crabbe's Tales. There was an essay on sleep that was really funny. Alexander declared that nothing convinced him that he was not a divinity, but his not being able to live without sleep. Life is to most such as could not be endured without frequent intermission of existence. There's also a great essay just about authors and writing. If we apply to authors themselves for an account of their state, it will appear very little to deserve envy, for they have in all ages been addicted to complaint. Just the language is so sort of luxuriously beautiful. We don't use these big, wonderful words anymore, and I wish we did. This is also from the essay about the author. From the public, and only from the public, is he to await a confirmation of his claim and a final justification of self-esteem. But the public is not easily persuaded to favor an author. Whoever has remarked the fate of books must have found it governed by other causes than general consent arising from general conviction. If a new performance happens not to fall into the hands of some who have courage to tell, and authority to propagate their opinion, it often remains long in obscurity and perishes unknown and unexamined. A very few, commonly constitute the taste of the time, the judgment which they have once pronounced. Some are too lazy to discuss, and some too timorous to contradict. It may, however, be, I think, observed that their power is greater to depress than exalt, as mankind are more credulous of censure than of praise. So many things that it's like, yep, still kind of the same. He talks about the difficulty of finding things to write about in his paper. A new paper lies under the same disadvantages as a new play. There is danger lest it be new without novelty. My earlier predecessors had their choice of vices and follies, and selected such as were most likely to raise merriment or attract attention. They have had the whole field of life before them, untrodden and unsurveyed. Characters of every kind shot up in their way, and those of the most luxuriant growth or the most conspicuous colors were naturally cropped by the first sickle. They that follow are forced to peep into neglected corners, to note the casual varieties of the same species, and to recommend themselves by minute industry and distinctions too subtle for common eyes. Yes, I would say that having read many authors that Jane Austen herself read, I do find the closest similarity to her writing style in her two reputed favorites, in Samuel Johnson and in William Cowper. In the Idler especially, there is just this combination of humor with good sense and just beautiful, beautiful writing that feels very, very Austenish to me. And Cowper also was just absolutely beautiful. One of my challenges, a sort of mini challenge for Febregency, was to memorize a poem. So I was paging through Cowper to try to find something relatively short to memorize, and one that stood out to me was an epistle to Lady Austen, which I think Jane Austen must have read it herself. You would think seeing her own last name would attract her to it, although it's not written to her. She never knew Cowper. It was written in 1781 and published in 1803. It's a good sort of cup of tea poem if you're looking for a little short Regency era poetry to read with your Sunday tea. Then I would definitely recommend this one. I only memorized part. Let's see if I can do it. But who can tell how vast the plan which this day's incident began? Too small, perhaps, the slight occasion for our dim-sighted observation. It passed unnoticed as the bird which cleaves the yielding air unheard. Oh, no. And yet may prove on... Okay, I guess I didn't quite get it. These last two lines, I needed a little prompt. And yet may prove, when understood, to be a harbinger of endless good. Isn't that lovely? The whole poem is about Cowper's friendship with Lady Austen and how when they first met, it was just a casual acquaintance. He didn't expect to find a lifelong, lovely friend. Imagine having a poet like Cowper or Coleridge or Wordsworth as a friend, and like for your birthday or for some occasion, they'd just write you an absolutely beautiful poem. But I just loved that sentiment. I hope my videos are maybe a little bit like that. They're fairly small. No, I'm not at all a huge YouTuber. This is just my hobby, not my job. I don't reach a huge audience, but hopefully even if it's just something small. Who can tell how vast the plan which this day's incident began? Two other sort of teacup poems I thought I would recommend were The Dream by Byron. I'll just read you out a tiny, tiny bit of it. It's a good length, like Epistle to Lady Austen, where it's not super short. It's kind of long enough to sit and savor, but it's also not so long that you get tired of reading it and have to, get up and do something else. As the name implies, this is about dreaming. The dread of vanished shadows, are they so? Is not the past all shadow? What are they? What are dreams? Creations of the mind? The mind can make substance and people planets of its own, with beings brighter than have been, and give a breath to forms which can outlive all flesh. My final recommendation for a quick Sunday tea poem would be Frost at Midnight by Coleridge, which I did quote a little piece of that. There was a beautiful cloudless night and the moon was rising right behind the icicles on my eaves, and it was so, so beautiful. I actually was tempted to write my own poem about it. I started scribbling down some ideas, but they're not in any kind of coherent shape. In Mysteries of Udolpho, Emily St. Aubert is constantly writing poems. I know, attempting to memorize a couple lines of poetry was the best I got. I did not, should that be a challenge for another Febregency in the future, to write your own poem? I would still love to pick up Crab's Tales, the other book at Fanny's Elbow in Mansfield Park. I never picked up Rob Roy. I did really want to get to some Sir Walter Scott, so that was kind of a bummer. But I do still have The Weekend. February isn't completely over yet, and I'm sure on Monday I will post my last sort of little reel reading update. So I will let you know then what I managed to get to. I am quite pleased with all the Regency fun I packed into this month. Over the weekend, I was playing my Jane Austen piano pieces and cooking up some Regency era recipes. They were recipes from this book, and I wanted to read you the name of the source because this author took them from a Regency era cookery book by Hannah Glass, and it was called The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, which far exceeds anything of the kind yet published. So that was published in 1747, printed for the author and sold at Mrs. Ashburn's, a china shop, the corner of Fleet Ditch. But then in 1784, we had Hannah Glass, The Art of Cookery Made Plain and Easy, which far exceeds anything of the kind yet published, to which are added 150 new and useful receipts, and also 50 receipts for different articles of perfumery with a copious index. So yes, I had to try the Little Fine Cakes recipe, which I ended up kind of cutting in half. It was very simple. It was basically just flour, eggs, sugar, and butter. I did cheat and use the mixer. I'm sure Hannah Glass, if she had a mixer available, would have cheated herself. And I also cheated for the syllabub recipe. Originally, I was thinking I would make white soup, because that's referenced in Pride and Prejudice, that Mr. Bingley is making it for the ball at Netherfield. But Hannah Glass's white soup recipe involves a knuckle of veal, a large fowl, a pound of lean bacon, half a pound of rice, 2 anchovies, a few peppercorns. Somehow I was imagining white soup as a dessert, and clearly it's not a dessert. Syllabub is a dessert. Syllabub is basically whipped cream, white wine, orange, and lemon. It was very refreshing. I could definitely see myself making it for a party. It would be lovely for a sort of summer picnic. It was absolutely lovely. There were a couple different recipes for syllabub, and one was syllabub under the cow, which, you know, you didn't have a mixer to whip the whipped cream, so if the milk came straight out of the cow, it'd be kind of frothy and nice. Hannah Glass says to use a chocolate mill, which I just used the mixer. I cheated. Yeah, so this is how the sort of final stretch, the editing process of my Febregency reading vlog went. Over the weekend, filmed my recipes and piano clips, very fun. Monday, I kind of took a look at all the clips I had and I thought, you know what, I've filmed mostly everything I wanted. I just need this one last wrap up, so I think I'm good to go. I'll just start editing tomorrow night. Tuesday night, I put all the clips in the timeline and I made the mistake of doing the math. It was like 7 hours of unedited raw footage to go through. This is Tuesday night, video is supposed to go up Friday morning. I was like, okay, that's 50 hours of time. I have 2 work days for my real job, so that's 16 hours gone. Also, hopefully some time to sleep and eat. Tuesday night, I was just feeling super overwhelmed. But Wednesday, I made good progress. A lot of the footage is like time lapses, so it's not like I had to watch all 7 hours. A lot of it was easily condensed. It just was intimidating to look at. It always is every month. I feel like my reading vlog is always, I feel like after I finish my reading vlog, I feel like sort of a dish rag that's just been wrung really dry. But anyway, Wednesday night editing went really well. I even sat down to try to edit, to memorize a little bit of that Cowper poem, and of course now here we are on Thursday. Final stretch, just getting this last clip done. I probably should start editing earlier, but the problem is, like last week I was filming and editing my kitchen tour, which, by the way, sorry, this end segment has just become such a ramble. My Emma Bridgewater order already arrived, or at least part of it. I got a couple of personalized pottery, a mug and a plate, and those have not arrived yet, but the tea towels and a beautiful little tea tray have arrived, so I'll have to put those clips in here so you guys can just get a little sneak peek of them. It's so lovely to have a little bit of springtime loveliness when we're still, you know, in the last sort of gray days of February. I have been seeing some little flowers come up though. I got my mom an aconite tea towel. Aconites are mentioned by Beverly Nichols. I was reading him last month. And her aconites have been coming up in her garden, so that's just perfect timing. The one last thing I wanted to make sure I told you guys before we wrapped up. So Lent is almost here. It's of course the 40 days before Easter. So for Christians, for myself, it's really a time to try to cut out distractions, maybe give up something that you really like for 40 days to just focus your attention back on God, to prepare for the sacrifice that Christ made for us. I decided that I am going to try to do kind of a digital detox during Lent, and I am not going to be posting my usual Friday uploads here on YouTube. I'm not going to be around as much on YouTube and Instagram. I've actually been thinking of taking a break for a while. I thought maybe what I'd do is post my 1000th video. So the 1000th video on my channel was back in the end of the year. So at first I was thinking maybe I'd take it at the beginning of the year. But Christy and I have been talking about Febregency for a while, and it just seemed like such a fun idea. I thought, well, I'll just put it off a little bit. We'll do it during Lent. It's my channel's 9th anniversary coming up. 9 years I've been making over 1,000 videos. Early March 2013 was when I started. I was so close to being finished filming, and my camera battery ran out. And I have misplaced the charger, which is really not a good thing to do when you're trying to finish your monthly reading vlog. Anyway, I've been looking forward to taking a break. Can you tell? Part of me would like to still post a March reading vlog so that I don't miss a month, but I guess at this point I don't really know. You'll see me at Easter. Maybe you'll see me at the end of March. Maybe not. I also wanted to do a little sort of 9th anniversary like letter, like on my channel's 6th anniversary, I did this little letter to the Bookish Kingdom, which I was really pleased with how it turned out. I know, for some reason I don't do the anniversaries like 5th and 10th. That makes sense. I don't know why I'm doing 6th and 9th instead. I didn't get around to writing it, but maybe I'll do it during Lent. Maybe I'll post it on my blog if you're not yet subscribed over there. It's bookishprincess.substack.com. So you should definitely go either bookmark it or you can enter your email and then you'll get new posts emailed to you. Sometimes the YouTube algorithm is not very kind when you take a break and come back, like they stop showing your videos to people. And I never like to tell people to turn on notifications because personally I find notifications to be really obnoxious. Like if I'm in the middle of something, I don't want to drop everything and watch even a video from a channel that I like. It's like I want to do that when I have time to do that. I feel like the email is less invasive because it's more like, you know, a letter arriving in your mailbox. You know, you see, oh, I have a letter from Emma. I'll read that later when I have time. Although probably most of you guys, like me, do not rely on the algorithm or on notifications. The way I always use YouTube is I go straight to my subscription box. I love that YouTube has that feature. I think it's so horrible the way like Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, like I don't think any other social media platform lets you see all in one place chronologically everyone you've chosen to follow, all of their uploads. If YouTube ever gets rid of that. Anyway, I wish you all a really wonderful and blessed Lent, and just FYI, there won't be new Friday uploads for a little while. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you to all of you who participated in and posted about Febregency. I'll talk to you again at Easter, and until then, I hope you have a magical start of the spring. Bye, guys.